So I've had the privilege to work with dairy and cotton farmers and their industries around their strategies related to people and workforce over the last sort of 10 years. And so these are sectors, I suppose, that have really prioritised people and workforce in their industries in that time. And that's extended from human resource management, issues on farms, skills and training, the nature of advice for farmers related to people and workforce, and also career paths. Now, all of their work, I suppose, is available to you on their websites, and you might have used some of the resources on, for instance, the People in Dairy website or the People in Ag website that's now being developed, for instance. But in terms of some of the drivers around why those industries have invested in this area and why farmers and growers themselves through their levy have said that this is really important, is really the things that I think were coming up this morning in Michael and Lisa's presentation and what was talked about at the tables. So for those industries, dairy and cotton, it was the increasing importance of the people aspects to farm productivity and profitability. Massive change in the farming systems. So many more non-family employees, specialisation of roles, and a massive influx around technology. So whether that's automatic milking systems, robotics, in cotton it was the round bale pickers that really came into the country through, because of the drought, post-drought, massive increase in production, but also the impact of mining in the north. But in that, it meant that the harvest labour reduced by 2/3, but the skill requirements and who you could put on that equipment, for instance, had massive impact. And the same with irrigation technology and irrigation infrastructure and the type of skills needed. The other thing that came along with this change is that skilled people really work as only part-time jobs, are only part of what they're looking for. It is about where they're living, whether there's things for their family, whether their spouse has a job. All those sorts of things came into those needs around skills. Some of the driver can be summed up by, it was actually one of the cotton managers that said to me, before all this, so pre-drought, pre-mining, pre-all these things, he said, people were just there. Like this was never an issue before. And we realised that things have changed, everything changed, we have to invest, we've got to understand what those implications are. So the jobs have changed, the careers have changed, the traditional pathways were gone. That's what has been happening in dairy and cotton. That's why they needed to invest. They felt prepared. So, what about the response? What are these sectors? What have they done over the last decade? Well, one of the first things they've done is to help individual farmers, individual growers, actually understand the changes in their own business and support those changes. So a lot of the effort has been into what is best practice human resource management, what's this real understanding of our compliance, what is it about retention of people, how can we reduce turnover, how can we resource farmers in effective position descriptions so that they're easy and simple, that can help communicate. How can we have, for instance in dairy, it was 120 technical advisors that actually understood HR and workforce and could actually, when a farmer turned up or spoke to them about saying, actually I'm needing to buy the farm next door, or wanting to buy a farm next door and grow, but I'm really worried about employment and labour and human resources. The industry wanted to change the conversation around, because normally an agronomist or a technical advisor would say, oh yes, I've heard that labour's a problem, and not actually help and contribute in this area. So what the dairy industry has done is, over the last sort of 6 to 8 years, turned that around so that there's 120 advisors that can actually have the conversation saying, yes, look, there's some things to navigate, but it's possible. and here's some of the ways that you can go about it. So definitely the response has been to help individual businesses see people and productivity in those links and really build that capability. The second response has been what we call the collective or collaborative response. So to understand these new jobs, understand where the turnover problems are, understanding new positions, pay, pathways, and making those visible. And to a range of stakeholders. So I do remember being in Gippsland where we'd just done all this work to show how many the question was asked earlier, how many jobs in this area are a gap, what are the nature of the jobs, how many for this area, what's being paid, what's the offer. And some of the stakeholders in the room said, well, I don't think dairy needs any jobs, do they? Secondly, it's such a poorly paying field, why would anybody want a job? And I'm not going to help. So that's how they came into the room. When this type of information, which was there was a gap, this was the positions that there were a gap in, this is what the positions were being paid and their working conditions, it turned the impressions of the stakeholders around because they had no idea. So the power of data and at a collective level to make things visible is what some of the industries are now, or dairy and cottoners are doing. So just to pick one intervention related to this collective action was the decision after 6 or 7 years around workforce planning and action was to appoint some regional workforce coordinators. There is people here at Murray Dairy that are involved, Gippsland, but the two that was in the study that I evaluated were in Western Victoria and Tasmania. They became, like what Michelle was calling, I suppose, that connector and broker, to work in the region, to help and support farmers in their human resource management, to connect with local stakeholders for local solutions. All the things, I suppose, that Michelle was talking about, I won't go over those, operated at this regional level. There were a farmer steering committee to the regional approach. The people that went into those positions happened to be farmers who also had been trained through the Human Resource Diploma. They networked to other farmers, they networked to other industry players and other providers in their regions, to government, to education providers, all based on farmers' needs for workforce and also their human resource management needs. So they're able to tap into what was there, sort of like what Michelle described happening in Queensland. So if it was issues of skill migration, if it was issues of representing regional needs to government, etc., they were able to network quickly with farmers and provide that. That has gone into some issues like having matching of employers and employees through a website called EMI. That's happening in Gippsland. So some of the impacts is that I think the dairy and cotton industry would say we have improved the situation. They can talk about what it was like 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Not a lot of data, not a lot of knowledge, not a lot of what jobs and roles there are. They now know what the turnover is, they now know what roles they have, no supply and demand, they can tap into what's on offer, and they can put programs in place for skilled managers, for instance, for share farmers, or for entry-level positions. They're all the things that those industries are doing. There's resources there for farmers, advisors are trained, there's go-to people, there's initiatives now for succession planning, for young farmer entry, there's coordinated submissions to labour agreements, from real farm information, there's pathways being worked on, for instance, like for share farming, etc., and a lot of capacity built to be able to respond. So the conclusion or lessons, when I think about then the fruit growing or the horticulture area, is that I recognise that there's potentially more competitive pressures around a competitive advantage through workforce, and so that might mean that there's not so much interest in collaborative or cooperative action. But I think there are some areas where you can get win from working together. That is, like what Michelle said, I think this broad attraction of the industry. So really that data and knowledge, if you do that collectively, you can sort of say, hey, there are these jobs, there are attractive opportunities for our industry. That's a real area of coordinated and collaborative action that makes everybody lift up to the top. Clear jobs and opportunities, like Michelle said, is something that can come from actually pooling that information. Yes, we have this number of jobs and these number of opportunities. When employers get together and really passionate about this topic, which has happened in these regional areas, so you have employers being on the steering committees, they're wanting to have a race to the top around valuing people and around the people aspects. So better management, sharing HR practices, sharing those things that really have an attraction and retention outcome. So some of the lessons would be about that investment in building the capacity and chipping away at some of the priority areas. That's what seems to have happened in dairy and cotton over a long period of time, and now you're getting these, I suppose, wins that are coming because you've got that built over those years.